Hi there, and welcome to Asteroid Day Live. I'm Sarah Cruddas. Now, from a global population of billions, only 566 humans have ever travelled into space, and each of them brought back a unique perspective both on our world and the wider universe. A number of them have also developed specific interests in asteroids. Now, this panel is your chance to ask some of our astronauts anything about asteroids and space. This International Astronaut panel brings together NASA and ESA space travellers to discuss questions submitted from you, the public, about asteroid facts, planetary science, planetary defence, and what it's like to be in space. Now, if you can please welcome to our panel Anousheh Ansari, astronaut and CEO of the xPrize, Ed Lu, astronaut, executive director, Asteroid Institute, and a member of the Asteroid Day expert panel, Jean-Francois Clervoy, astronaut and founder of Air Zero G, and Nicole Stott, astronaut, artist, and founder of the Space for Art Foundation. Now, Ed, we're going to start with you, and all these questions have come in from Twitter. We've had an overwhelming amount of questions because people are just really excited to find out as much as possible about asteroids. So this question comes from Marty Brink, and his question for you, Ed, is: are the number of asteroids increasing in the asteroid belt? And if so, does this increase the chances of one hitting Earth?
The number of asteroids in the asteroid belt is relatively constant. There's an influx and there's an outflux, meaning there are new asteroids created and there are asteroids which get thrown out of the belt. So it kind of stays roughly constant. Now, the important thing to remember is that the asteroids that are in the asteroid belt are not the ones that can hit the Earth. They kind of tend to stay safely in the asteroid belt, and that's between Mars and Jupiter, and the Earth is far inside of Mars. The ones we have to worry about are the ones that are actually thrown out of the asteroid belt and end up in closer to the sun, near where the Earth orbits the sun, and those are the ones we call near-Earth asteroids. Those are the ones that are a danger. They're also the ones that are the most interesting to visit because they're the easiest to visit because they're closer.
And do we know how many of those asteroids there are at the moment?
Oh, there are millions of asteroids in the asteroid belt. And in fact, the number of asteroids is really something you can't just say how many asteroids there are. You have to say how many asteroids there are larger than a certain amount. It's like asking how many rocks there are on Earth. Well, it depends on if you're counting sand grains or not, or things like that. So if I ask the question, let's concern ourselves with the ones that could hit the Earth. Those are the near Earth asteroids. Of the ones large enough to say destroy a city, say the size of the one that hit in 1908 in Tunguska, that's about 45 meters in size, and there's about 1 million or so of those.
And have we, because I read somewhere once that we don't actually know the number of potentially hazardous asteroids that there are. Have we got any more of an overall idea of this?
Yeah, we have an estimate of the number of asteroids that are, as you call them, potentially hazardous, those that could hit the Earth, uh, because we haven't yet found them all. So you calculate the number of them kind of the way we do polling for elections ahead of time. You do samples. You measure the number in a certain region in the sky, and you know how much your coverage is, and you multiply it up. So just like for polling, there's some margin of error. So we think we know pretty well, but it is an estimate, and it could be off by 20% either way or so.
Okay, fantastic. I think that's the best analogy I've ever heard of how it's just like election polling. Anousheh, this question is for you, and it comes from Clemisha Allison on Twitter. Now, her question is: was it an asteroid or a meteorite that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago?
It was a large size asteroid, the size of a city, approximately 10 kilometers, that hit the Earth just at the right speed and the right angle to actually wipe out 3/4 of the inhabitants of our planet. So it can be very destructive force and something that we should keep an eye for.
And do you think it's one of these things, because often when we think of asteroids, it sounds almost like science fiction, kind of like the reality we're living in right now with COVID-19. Do you think it's one of these things that, even though it sounds ludicrous, the idea of an asteroid potentially coming near Earth, that it's important that we continue to focus on studying asteroids and learning more about the risk they present to us?
Well, it has happened and it can happen again. So it is a wise thing for us to do to keep an eye on them, because when they're at a distance, just by nudging them a little bit, we can alter the course and perhaps save the entire planet. But if we find out when it's too late, then the force required to nudge that, it's not going to be something we can do, and it can be destructive. So it is a wise thing for us to keep an eye on them and to have plans in case there's one that is predicted to hit our planet.
So basically, the more that we actually study asteroids and learn more about the movement, the Yarkovsky effect, for example, the better we can predict the future. And that's almost our gift to the future, understanding more about asteroids.
Absolutely. It is really important, because there also, we've had asteroids and meteorite hit our planet, and depending on the size, they can, you know, just go unnoticed, or they can be destructive. So it's something that regardless of the size and the frequency, it's a good thing for us to keep an eye on it and study it.
Fantastic. Okay, well, next question is for you, Jean-Francois, and it comes from Twitter again, and this is Crystal at Getting Spooky. And her question is, if the DART mission, which is NASA's mission, and the Hera mission are successful, is there another mission plan to test under different circumstances or at a bigger asteroid?
Well, at this time, there is no mission decided beyond the DART and Hera from ESA. ESA is very happy to collaborate with NASA on this mission, but we need the results of those missions before we decide to invest on other missions. So there are no other missions decided at this time, but there are plenty of ideas that are published in various papers by experts, by you know, people doing theories, and but we need to know first if what we have predicted is close to what we observe, or vice versa, and then decide what's the best next mission. But you know, we don't know how the impacts of DART will actually have an effect. Will it be a small effect, a big effect? It depends on so many things that we don't know about the asteroids that are impacted. The porosity, the density, are they hard or soft? You know, in order to move an asteroid, we need to provide a momentum. We need to move it by, you know, putting some shock. But depending on the shock, the effect of the shock, we might have more or less diverting effect. So we'll see once we have results from those missions.
So for anyone listening at home, can you just, or watching this at home, can you just explain a little bit more about the two missions? Because I understand it's the NASA mission which will launch first, the DART mission, and then Hera some years later.
So the DART mission is a mission that will throw an object on the asteroid to make an impact. And then the Hera mission will observe the effect of the impact. Because so these are two missions. One is a cause, and the other one is observing the effect of the impact. And then the target is actually a very small asteroid. And when you impact, well, like when you punch, there will be an effect on the trajectory and on the rotation of the asteroid. And this is what Hera will observe. Basically, the two missions need each other to provide results.
So this sounds like it's something from a 90s science fiction film.
You know, asteroids, sometimes you might see them as you know, a threat, but actually they are part of the solar system. They are part of the creation of Earth and who we are. And we don't know if asteroids might have been responsible for the creation of life on Earth. So asteroids, you should see them as friends. You should study them, understand how they are composed, and then study how to deflect them if one day we identify one that is dangerous, because we know it has happened in the past and it might happen in the future again.
Okay, I like that answer as well. I think that's a very positive way to look at it. Nicole, a question for you, and this is from Nathan Corliss, and their question is, what is the most important skill or skills for an astronaut who will work with asteroids to have?
Well, that's a great question, because I think that what it'll end up coming down to is the same kind of skills that we have for astronauts, right? Primarily, for the same kind of skills in the end. And everybody else can tell me if I'm wrong or not, but it seems like no matter what we train to do as astronauts, if you're working on the science, if you're learning about the systems of your spacecraft, if you're, training to do a spacewalk, there's the technical side of it, but ultimately there's the how am I going to work, not just as myself, but as a really effective, efficient team to, to satisfy the mission, to be successful. And I think the same thing is going to be true when we're out as astronauts, exploring, rendezvousing with an asteroid, and then physically there learning more about it. I mean, how cool will that be? And then the technicalities of that are what's going to be, maybe something a little bit different, like all of the things that all three of these folks have already talked about. What's it made of? How do we get there? Is this a threat, or is it something that I am just looking at to learn a little bit more about? But I think in the end, it's really, what do we look at astronauts for right now? And ultimately, that's about how can you work as a team to successfully achieve the mission.
And in terms of seeing humans actually visit an asteroid, maybe perhaps even one of the moons of Mars, how far into the future do you think this could be? Is this something we could see in the next 10, 20, 30 years, or is it impossible to tell yet?
I don't know if it's impossible to tell. I'd like to think that this, as we start talking about, right now where we're, it makes me so happy to think about going back to the moon, establishing a permanent presence there, about how that can lead us to improving life here on Earth and going on to Mars, is kind of this staging. But in my mind, there's nothing that stops us in parallel with that with all the technology that we're going to need to do those things, to be able to do the asteroid exploration as well. And there will be some other subtle things that need to be a little bit different, but I think it all needs to play together. I mean, there needs to be a little bit of a rhyme and reason to how we put all of these missions together to, I think, to get the best out of them in the end.
Do you think perhaps visiting one of Mars's satellites, that might be the first real visit we have to an asteroid then?
I think that sounds like, to me, that's, I'm old right now, but even in my younger days, that was kind of this idea that, oh, we'll go to one of the, to the moons of Mars, or, something that's circling in that area or orbiting. And I would love to see that happen. It sounds like there might even be things that are more interesting to us in those places than on the surface of Mars itself.
I think all of us are actually alive today in a really interesting time, because all these things that seem like far off dreams, like when I was growing up in the 90s, we were meant to be on Mars by now, and we're not. I truly believed it.
I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, and I don't see the flying cars outside. And yeah, we were supposed to be on Mars. I think, something you mentioned earlier too was this whole idea of like the sci-fi of it. I think it's what's so inspirational, right? The way all of us have watched things that we knew to be science fiction turn into science fact. And we know through all of us here, even, the people that don't have their video up, that we can do really incredibly complex things when we just decide to do them, when we put our minds to it and work together to make it happen. And, going and as an astronaut to an asteroid does not seem like an unbelievable thing to do. Yeah.
Do I like to call it science prediction, because science fiction actually predicts what's going to happen. And I think all of us are actually, what's so exciting about this asteroid day is we got the timing wrong. We thought we'd be on the moon, or a sustained presence on the moon by now. We thought we'd be on Mars by now, but instead, all these science fiction things are happening now, and all of us are kind of on the cusp of this new era. So that's what I think is so exciting. But Nicole, I really appreciate your great answers there. We're going to ask one more audience question, and that is going to be for Ed. So your question is again from Twitter, and it's from @BabsKWall. And their question is, what is the likelihood that the projected path of an asteroid could be extremely off target, and just how accurate are the readings?
That's a great question, because it's not really just about discovering asteroids. It's about knowing where they're going. You actually have to track them and calculate their trajectory. And in fact, if you take that the next step further, the deflection, which we talked about earlier, of asteroids is actually relatively easy. we kind of roughly know the physics of that. The hardest part is actually finding and tracking them, and it's the tracking part that's hard. So the way we do it now is the longer you track it, the better you can tell where it's going. And if you have observations over a period of several months, generally our trajectory is pretty good. We know reasonably well where it's going. The trajectories don't tend to be way off unless they go near another planet. Then all bets are off, and then we have to remeasure things. But when I say pretty good, you have a rough idea of whether that's going to hit the planet or not.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. And that is the last of our audience questions. Jean-Francois, I just wanted to pick up with something Nicole spoke about as well, and that's actually visiting an asteroid. And that is, what kind of gravity does an asteroid have, and what would it be like for the astronauts to actually walk on an asteroid?
The gravity on the surface of an asteroid, whatever the size, will be very, very small. So any astronaut visiting an asteroid better be well hooked to the surface, because most of the asteroids that are relatively small, a few hundred meters wide, if you jump, not too strong, you just jump, you live forever, because the escape velocity is very small. It's smaller than the velocity you can get when you jump off the ground with your two legs. So the gravity, is a proportion of the mass, and also inverse proportion of the square of the radius. So if to make it simple, let's consider an asteroid that's spherical, about the same density of the Earth. Then the ratio of the radius is the same of the ratio of the gravity. So if you are on an asteroid that is 1 million times smaller than Earth, the gravity will be 1 million times less. So gravity is actually very low, and it's even lower than the best quality of weightlessness we can get on board the space station for most relatively small asteroids. So when we reproduce gravity on a zero-G plane, for example, we can only reproduce 1/100th of a G. But the asteroids we are visiting these days, the gravity on the surface is 10,000 times smaller than Earth's gravity. So the rule is, be hooked to the surface if you want to stay and dig and study.
I like it. Do you know, I have to ask this as well, seeing as we've got 4 space travelers with us. Would any of you go to an asteroid given the chance?
Sure.
Oh, yes.
Where do I sign up?
Excellent.
You got a good crew right here, all 4. We could go together. A 5, 6, 7. There's 2.
What is nice on an asteroid is the horizon is very, very close. Already the moonwalkers, those who walked on the moon, they say the horizon was looking so close to them, but the moon is big. But imagine yourself standing up on a small rock, even if it's 100 or 1 kilometer wide, which is big, 1 kilometer, still you go around very fast, provided you're hooked to the surface.
I will remember that if ever I visit an asteroid. And so Jean-Francois, that's a great point, and it actually leads me on to something that I wanted to ask you, Nicole. And when we talk about astronauts visiting the moon, and actually one of the greatest things to come from going to the moon and going to space is looking back and seeing Earth and being inspired. And Nicole, not only are you an astronaut, you're also an artist. And what do you see as the real value in sending people who aren't traditional scientists into space, or traditional military personnel, not your typical astronaut, and how can that bring value back to Earth, and what value does art and inspiration have as we move forward in exploring space?
Yeah, I think, I think like everyone here, there's the hope that as many people from as many different experiences and backgrounds will have this opportunity to separate from the planet, to see it the way we were blessed to, and then even from further, off that close horizon that Jean-Francois speaks of. I mean, how cool would that be? Just because I think in the end, it really is all about this better understanding, even given how beautiful it is really this understanding of who and where we all are, together in space already. So I'm hopeful that as many as possible will have that opportunity. I think it brings a perspective with it that we might not make ourselves aware of in our everyday lives, even though I honestly believe that we all have the opportunity right here on this wonderful planet to look around and discover, the awe and wonder that surrounds us right here, if we open our minds and our hearts and our, eyes to it, I guess. Um, to me, art, I think, is it's just this really interesting way of sharing experiences that we have. That was my initial goal with using art, after retiring from NASA. But I think bigger than that, we were speaking of earlier, this need to, first of all, be aware, be able to track these asteroids, and awareness that they exist. Last year, Asteroid Day had a competition for kids to create something with respect to asteroids. And I think a lot of them might not even have known, what an asteroid was. So it raises this awareness. And then we're in a position of, okay, how do we better understand that so that we can understand its relationship to us? And then there's just I think even as the scientists are looking more and more at what we discover about them, there's a real value in art as a tool to communicate that complexity in a much more understandable way. And so I think there's many layers of why the artistic side of it is important. And yeah, I'd love to see as many people get their eyes on that view from above as possible.
And just very quickly, Earthrise probably changed humanity more than very few other photographs. What impact, going back to Jean-Francois' description, will an astronaut being tethered to an asteroid, looking back potentially at Earth and seeing it much, much smaller on the horizon, what impact will that kind of image potentially have on humans?
Wow, I hope it amplifies, what we've already experienced through, our low Earth orbit opportunities, through, our friends who spent time on the moon. I hope it just, just gives us that opportunity to pull back even more and discover, even if you're just looking at this dot of light, this sense of who and where we all are together, even though those people might, might be tethered out to that asteroid at that point. I love looking at even the robotic missions that we have that are going off and doing this. What is it we're always looking for? We're looking for more understanding of that place that we're going to explore. And yet our favorite pictures, the iconic one to me is like the Cassini image of the rings of Saturn. And then you've got this little dot of light that's us. We are always looking for the relationship of us to everything that surrounds us. And I think that's going to happen when we're tethered to those asteroids too.
I think that's a fantastic way to describe it. And just last but by no means least, Anousheh, can you just, obviously we're entering into a new way of exploring space, and you could almost, I like to liken this almost to the Mayflower moment in terms of private industries driving forward exploration. You are the CEO of the xPrize, which is working to enable competitions to drive forward exploration in this new commercial space era. Can you just talk us about what the future is for the xPrize?
Well, at xPrize, we believe that competitions can spur awareness and also innovation and breakthroughs. And of course, commercialization of space is where xPrize has its origins and beginnings. And we constantly look at other areas where we can have effective breakthroughs. One of those areas, of course, is detection and deflection of asteroids. So we've been discussing a potential competition in that around that concept. Other areas that we've looked at is actually looking at the space debris. Even though asteroids are bigger threats, we have little threats surrounding our planets all the time, and especially with launch of more satellites, if those are not properly decommissioned and deorbited, can cause small damages. We looked at if there are ways of effectively cleaning basically our the orbit around our planet from satellites or decommissioned objects that we put in orbit. And we've always looked at how space resources can actually help life on our planet, and looking at some of these resources, perhaps space solar satellites or other means that we can harness energy from space and help provide a sustainable, clean source of energy for people on Earth. So we're always interested to look at how those technologies and research in orbit can help life on our planet.
And just finally, before I wrap up, what does it mean to you to be doing what you're doing with the xPrize? It's in terms of driving forward new ways of exploring, and particularly with asteroids as well.
I'm really excited being able to have sort of my hands on the wheel at xPrize this past couple of years. Of course, you know, this year has been a very rewarding year in terms of seeing what we started almost 15 years ago come to fruition in the ways that we've seen the SpaceX launches and going back to the space station from US. But more than that, it also, I've been very excited about the results of our Google Lunar xPrize and the fact that we're going back to the moon, and some of those teams that competed for the Google Lunar xPrize now are winning contracts to be part of that mission back to the moon. It just shows that, you know, a collaboration between the public sector and the private sector can really advance technologies in a more efficient way, and it creates a lot more excitement when the public is part of this whole mission and exploration, and it's not just something that a small group of people in the government are interested and focused on. So I'm very excited about what I'm seeing as potential of advancement in commercial space activities, which will also open up the door, hopefully, to more people experiencing it firsthand and having that awe and wonder that Nicole talked about. And, you know, since it's a transformational experience, I think we will have a lot more aware individuals walking around being ambassadors for a more unified, more harmonious life amongst all of humanity on our planet Earth.
And I think that's an absolutely fantastic point to end on, because, you know, more than 100 billion human beings have existed in the entire history of our species. As I said at the beginning, fewer than 600 have left Earth, and we've got 4 of you here speaking to all of us today, which is just incredible. And I hope, as you just said, that this number increases, and that one day many more people can experience the chance to leave Earth and to look back at space, and also to one day perhaps even be tethered to an asteroid. Thank you so much for joining our panel, and have a great day.